let's get started. Just a quick reminder, as usual, mute yourself if you're not speaking. If you don't want, this is going to be recorded and it's going to be on the YouTube channel. If you don't want your picture on the video, please turn off your video. If you don't want anything that you say be part of the video, then just let us know that you want to speak off record. So today we'll be presented by Donna Mejia.
Mejia. Thank you.
Mejia. Thank you so much. The theme is being an ally, moving beyond bystander syndrome, and having courageous conversations in the midst of cultural collisions. So I'll give you a short introduction. So Donna Mejia is assistant professor at CU Boulder Theater and Dance Department. She's a choreographer, scholar, instructor, and performer specializing in contemporary dance, traditions of the African and Arab diaspora, and emerging fusion traditions in transnational electronica. This genre provides a rich area for the study of cultural imperialism, gender representation, and electronic digital globalization. Donna is also an authorized instructor of the Brazilian Sylvester modern dance technique and is a lauded representative of this esoteric study of dance after 20 years of practice. For 10 years, she was faculty member at Colorado College and director of the Colorado College International Summer Dance Festival. Donna's current projects include directing the philanthropic performance group, the Sovereign Collective, and working as a part of the research and development team of Kenji Williams' Bella Gaia Origin Stories Beautiful Earth Education Initiative. Donna completed her undergraduate degree in business administration at CU Boulder and received her Master of Fine Arts degree on full fellowship from Smith College. She joined the University of Colorado at Boulder as an assistant professor of dance in 2012. She's the first professor of tribal transnational fusion globally and serves as the departmental director of graduate part-time teaching fellows. Donna balances her time lecturing, instructing, and touring throughout the US and abroad. So, beautiful career. I love dance. Thank you so much again, Donna. I leave it up to you now.
Thank you so much. I had no idea we were going to do an intro, so I kind of was hoping my anonymity would give me a pass card for saying some crazy things today, but now I'm on notice that I have to, everyone knows how to find me after this. No, just joking. It's wonderful to connect with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thank you very much, Susan and Rick, for introducing me to this study group. It has been delightful to be a part of the conversations that are happening here. I really enjoyed the last few sessions with Mr. Waddles. Thank you so, so, so much. And today's topic is an adaptation from a commercial lecture that I tour with some of my performances. And as such, I have tried to direct it towards what I feel resonates within the Urantia book. But please know that it's mostly going to be a day where we discuss outside sources and other materials that put us in conversation with the issues the Urantia book puts on our radar. I will be sharing my screen, and there are a couple of videos involved with today. And so I'm not sure how the sharing would work with videos, and I will also put links for those videos in the chat screen. So if you're new to Zoom, what you can do is open a chat window down on the bottom of your screen. It's about the 5th or 6th button over from the left. If you hit that chat window, it will open up in tandem with your visual screen, and you'll be able to go to those video links on YouTube. I do want to give a little bit of a heads up that because this lecture is designed for collegiate age students, there are a lot of references to popular culture. There's a little bit of irreverence and humor involved in what's going to be happening today. It is not meant to shock or offend at any time. So just please know that it is offered in the spirit of trying to get young people to take on a very difficult topic. So we have the benefit many of us, of years and maturity of knowing how these conversations can sometimes unfold. But I thought I would leave the humor in there just so we could stay light with ourselves. More than anything, I want to power through portions of this to give us all a platform, a common reference point for starting a discussion, and then open it up for lots of questions and lively discussions. So your honesty and your unfiltered thoughts are very welcomed. Please feel free to speak from the heart. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can I get a thumbs up? Is everyone seeing slides? Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate your help. So the first thing I'd like to do is make a pledge to all of you that I will be encouraging and humorous in my offerings. I will explain thoughtfully and clearly. I will offer citation for what I have learned and concede openly what I have not yet learned. I will ensure a welcoming, judgment-free, and inviting environment where counterpoint ideas can be exchanged diplomatically. Our discussion will welcome new ideas and perspectives, and I will remain receptive to these concepts changing and transforming. Please let me know if you perceive glaring holes in my research. I intend to give you tools to increase your conversancy, not only dance, but also justice work. And please, please, please know that I have no interest in telling you what to think. Rather, I am very passionate about helping many people ask better questions and really think about the kind of self-evident truths that can come to the surface when we get rid of the interference of our social filters. And we are all indoctrinated in so many ways socially. I pledge that I will respect our differences in and out of the classroom, and your courage, and diplomacy, and open thinking are very, very important to me, as well as your dignity and your comfort. So I hold myself to be accountable with the same standards that I'm asking of you. What I always ask of my college students is to try and enter a state of strong hunger and wonder, and always ask the question, what if and what else? Never stopping our questions. So our conversation will have multiple perspectives outside of the Urantia book and reference many global cultures, belief systems, social models, religions, and worldviews, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Sorry, but not sorry. I wanted to start with a quote from Dennis Waitley, where he says, "There are two primary choices in life: to accept conditions as they exist or accept the responsibility for changing them." I think so many people who want to join a conversation about cultural differences are interested in trying to heal things, but many of us are at a loss as to know how to begin. So today's presentation is really about the one-on-one reactions, the one-on-one encounters that we have, where we have those teachable moments and how to approach them. And when many people shy away and go towards silence or passive watching on those conversations, I wanted to offer the following words. In a sense, inaction can be defined as a hopelessness that your ideas and wishes cannot be achieved. What I'm hoping for is to give all of us tools to encounter the unfamiliar so that instead of feeling paralyzed by inactivity or confusion, we have a starting place to jump in and create healing. I always have to remind young people that they don't need to know all of the answers before they begin the process. It's okay to start a very difficult conversation without exactly knowing where you're going to go with it. And pulling from our Urantia book, I think being able to understand that broadening our horizons is what we've been asked to do. So, quoting our book, "The wise man universalizes his heart. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. those who aspire to greatness must learn to humble themselves. And while it is true that many men and women must assiduously apply themselves to some definite pursuit as a livelihood vocation, it is nevertheless wholly desirable that human beings should cultivate a wide range of cultural familiarity with life as it is lived on earth. Truly educated persons are not satisfied with remaining in ignorance of the lives and doings of their fellows. So to me, as an educator, if someone just becomes a stronger elitist as they broaden their knowledge, they've missed the entire point of education. So my goal is in helping young people and anyone who's interested to learn how to navigate those tricky spaces. It is very easy for anxiety to make us pull away, but our book tells us every time man yields to anxiety, he takes one step away from the leading of the spirit of his heart. Pride obscures God. If you would obtain heavenly help, put away your pride. Every hair of pride shuts off saving light, as it were, by a great cloud. If you are not right on the inside, it is useless to pray for that which is on the outside. And we have seen so much in the press around offering thoughts and prayers for such horrible acts that we're witnessing across at least the United States right now, many other parts of the world as well. None of it is new. However, many of us are at a loss as to know where to begin. The first place I would suggest is perhaps to let down on pride, to please set pride aside and admit we don't know how to fix, but we know how to ask questions and maybe locate answers by that kind of tribulation and conversation. So being able to let go of pride means that we can begin something new and fresh in a very childlike and innocent way and rediscover possibilities. Starting with myth number 1, that we need to create stronger protection against harmful people or regimes or cultures or political foes. This is something that is being stirred up around the world, a level of defensiveness that somehow we need to protect ourselves from each other. But those who we define as foes honestly change is based on the whims of our times and the values that shift as our lives unfold. And so many of our enemies are constructed for us through political means. Were we to meet people from opposing cultures one-on-one on the street, we all know that many times these conflicts would not be an issue, but they are put into our heightened awareness because of the media. What I would like to offer is that we have to be careful about our presumptions of commonality or incompatibility, trying to find out what is valuable to all of us and not assuming the same thing. We have differences in our motives for living. We have differences in how we define mutuality, dignity, and respect. We have differences in how we define consent and appropriate boundaries with each other. We have differences in our social notions of fairness and reciprocity. Reciprocity is important because so many people sometimes expect something in kindness in return for an act of kindness. And the cultural demands around that can sometimes get in the way. We have differences in our individual capacities for reasoning and logic, and our values, which shift considerably over time. The same thing that was important to you in kindergarten is certainly not the same thing that's important to you now, perhaps. And that continues to shift throughout our lives. And we always have to remember those things are liquid. And norms, the way our culture defines normalcy, can change constantly. Matter of fact, it's true that viral videos can reach 51.4% of the human population within 1 week. In the past, when we had cultural transfer, many times it would take 16 to 25 years for elders to pass cultural knowledge on to youngsters. But now we can reach more than half of the human population in 1 week. That means our norms are changing faster than frequently we can keep up with. Here is little snapshot of a few norms that have changed. Expectations, social definitions, values, and things that in the past would have been seen as absolutely ridiculous to us, but are now the norm. So in talking about cultural differences, we do have to remember that there are individuals who may be harmful to themselves and others. They exist in all cultures. However, the categorical dismissal of an entire people is illogical, and it takes generations to repair. So what we are trying to do is interrupt the trajectory of hatred that is being stirred up. Our book tells us that we are destined to live a narrow and mean life if we learn to love only those who love us. Human love may indeed be reciprocal, but divine love is outgoing in all its satisfaction seeking. The less of love in any creature's nature, the greater the love needed. And the more does divine love seek to satisfy such need. Love is never self-seeking, and it cannot be self-bestowed. Divine love cannot be self-contained. It must be unselfishly bestowed. So instead of looking for reciprocity, we're talking about how to start new conversations without necessarily, maybe, having full resolution. In considering individuals that are dangerous to themselves, I would like to reference the work of my colleague, Brian Cox, who is also here for this conversation. He did a wonderful presentation at IC17 about the nature of evil. And he brought to our attention the following categories of pathology. Psychopaths that are estimated to be 1 to 2% of the population. Sociopaths. Malignant narcissists, which technically the American Psychiatry Foundation have defined the American president to fall into this category. Criminal. And borderline personalities. Brian Cox made the very brilliant point that these individuals have the potential to be harmful, but we frequently put much of our energy into trying to catch psychopaths and deal with psychopaths. They tend to show up quickly because they are harmful to 1 or 2 people before we can catch them. It is the other categories of pathology, sociopaths, criminals, and borderline personalities that tend to be more harmful to more humans. Here is why. All ranges of personality disorders involve varying degrees of failing to take responsibility, having no remorse, lacking empathy, lacking a conscience, possessing full reasoning capacity. And within those personality disorders, moral reasoning doesn't extend beyond what is good or bad for them and only them. So their blinders do not allow them to be able to experience true empathy for others. And in this, it is the people who have more borderline disorders that have a tendency to be charismatic and convincing of other people, to other people, of their harmful ways. The USA Centers for Disease Control conducts an annual national health survey, and for the last 60 years, their consistency is established that currently more than 8 million people in the USA have what are classified as mental problems. So Brian Cox said very well, our ignorance, avoidance, and minimalism of aberrant personalities allows them to perpetuate greater harm than blatant psychopaths. And he brought up the point that Adolf Hitler affected millions. World War, started by Japan, affected millions. Stalin, responsible for over 23 million deaths. Leopold II of Belgium. World War I, 17 million. The genocide of American First Nation citizens, 10 million. The transatlantic slave trade, over 100 million deceased. So it's people who rise to power and have very charismatic ways of convincing others that they have mutual enemies. Tends to affect millions of people, whereas we tend to catch psychopaths quickly and are able to deal with them and remove them from a position of being harmful to others. This is something for us to keep in mind as we look forward to how to heal our planet. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which is an organization that has been tracking hate crimes in the United States for many years, reports that there are over 917 hate groups operating in the United States alone, 15 of them active within my own backyard. Believe me, I've encountered some of those individuals in my classes. So when we think about two sides trying to fight each other, our book has this to offer. War has served many valuable purposes in the past, and it has been an indispensable scaffolding in the building of civilization, but it is rapidly becoming bankrupt, incapable of producing dividends of social gain in any way commensurate with the terrible losses attendant upon its invocation. And of course, what was also said to us by Jesus, verily, verily, I say to you, he who rules his own self is greater than he who captures the city. Self-mastery is the measure of man's moral nature and the indicator of his spiritual development. So I've geared our talk towards the individual experience, the ability to go to each encounter with another individual and have a starting point. No more should you fear that God will punish a nation for the sin of an individual. Neither will the Father in heaven punish one of his believing children for the sins of a nation. Albeit, the individual member of any family must often suffer the material consequences of family mistakes and group transgressions. Do you not realize that the hope of a better nation or a better world is bound up in the progress and individual enlightenment of the individual? Pardon my snag on reading. Myth number 2, we are good and others are bad. In terms of perceiving others as bad, it might be more useful to honestly see all of our quote unquote enemies as wounded. Mark Ham and Ramon Spaj found that 40% of lone wolf terrorists who act in isolation without connection to a larger group, they had identifiable mental problems, and that was in 2015. Another study, Paul Gill found that 32% of lone wolves were diagnosed with mental illnesses. Peter Simi found that among white supremacists, there were elevated rates of childhood physical abuse, 45% of them, childhood neglect, 46%, family substance abuse, 49%, and mental illness, 57%. We're starting to see some observable trends. Anton Wienik found that among persons who traveled to the Netherlands, from the Netherlands to Syria to align with radicalism, there were high rates of individuals with histories of behavioral problems and disorders. 60% had psychosocial problems. 46% displayed behavioral problems. 6% had a diagnosed mental health problem. And most importantly, Dr. David Healy found that 90% of school shootings over more than a decade have a high correlation to the usage of a widely prescribed type of antidepressant called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. We may be creating some of our own issues by helping people numb themselves not only to their pain, but also numb themselves to their empathy. Dr. Jeffrey Swanson reminds us, we need to think of violence itself as a communicable disease. We have kids growing up exposed to terrible trauma. We did a study some years ago looking at violence risk among people with serious mental illness. The 3 risk factors we found were most important. First, a history of violent victimization early in life. Second, substance abuse. And the third is exposure to violence in the environment around you. People who had none of those risk factors, even with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, had very low rates of violent behavior. Abuse, violence, and the environment around you, those are the kind of things you are not going to solve by having someone take a mood stabilizer. These are deeper healings that are needed. So, how do we help people find something they can personally connect with so that it can remake them from the inside out? The first thing that I think we need to talk about is the use of epigenetics in the Urantia book. This is something that has created great controversy for a very long time and much harm. What I would like to point out about the science of epigenetics, it's a study of changes in organisms The study of changes in organisms caused by modifications in gene expression rather than an alteration in the genetic code itself. But what is frequently not part of the conversation is that the science of epigenetics does not predict capacities, intellect, courage, morality, or choice patterns, right? And so it's important for us to remember that when someone chooses or acts in a way that expands the range of possibilities that might be pre-coded in their DNA, genes mutate, and this is known as evolving. And so to try and script certain groups as capable or incapable of being strong participants in human activity and intellectual life at this time does not serve us, because we are not to judge what they are capable of. So how do you find something that can really, really remake you from the inside to help you discover your own personal brilliance? I think it means making room for healing and helping individuals to understand that their self-worth is worth your time, your investment, your questions, and your intention. Myth number 3. Somehow, national culture is disintegrating due to our disparate views and unreconcilable cultural differences. So the first thing I'd like to do to address that myth is to talk about my own definition of culture. For me, culture is a categorical display of customs, attire, language, norms, and values signifying membership of a defined and recognizable group. So cultures can be grouped by nationality, ethnicity, and self-selected membership. There are subcultures within nationalities. Culture does not just refer to nationality. And there are many humans who negotiate overlapping identities amongst several categories of belonging. So for example, we may have Black culture in the United States. We may have Black gay culture that differentiates itself. Within another substrata, we may have Black gay drag culture. And so all of these citizens may share the same background of being African American, but have very different cultural references based on what is most important to their identity signature. And very few people will just have one category of identity. So that complexity adds many dimensions to our contemporary conversation. But as those categories expand and we start to overlap, we also need to look at how do we define global citizenship? What's most important to us? So for me, global citizenship is the acknowledgement of interconnectivity, intersectionality, where our lives intersect, meaning interdependence, the ways in which we cannot move forward without all others involved. The acknowledgement of stewardship of the environment and the other life forms we share the planet with. And the acknowledgement that celebrating and learning about others does not erase, negate, or vilify one's own culture. So being concerned about traditionalism and purity actually takes away more than it gives. We don't preserve culture by putting it under glass and not letting it breathe and interact with other people. It needs to be shared. It needs to bump up against differences. It needs to be able to interact with young generations and not be held as a relic in a museum. So the confusion that many people, at least my students, express when I talk about that point is they say, well, yes, what about cultural appropriation? I'm scared to offend anyone. So I wanted to offer a video that has a significant amount of irreverence to it. And so there is some adult language. And for that, I want to apologize if it is in any way a little jarring. But this is a brilliant philosopher who is also a janitor and has had a tremendous following on the internet. So if you haven't caught him yet, I want to share him with you here. I'm going to play the video. If the video plays well, can I please get a thumb up from those of you who are on screen? If not, we'll stop the playback and I will simply post the link in the chat window. So
what do you think is the question that I get asked the most from my viewers and followers?
Okay, good. Thank you.
How do you get subscribers on YouTube? Where do you get your ideas? Are you really a janitor? Nope, none of those. The question that I get asked by far the most often is, what do you think about white people with dreadlocks? Not even kidding, I get asked that like twice a week. Now, for the longest time, I wondered why anyone thought I would give a shit what other people do with their hair. And I really still don't give a shit what people do with their hair. But eventually, I learned that a lot of these people were actually asking me about this thing known as cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is the adoption of specific elements of one culture by people who are not a part of that culture. And in my experience, this term has a negative connotation, as in people don't like when you do it. So what I assume based on that definition is that dreadlocks are considered to be a part of black culture. And white people with dreadlocks are supposedly appropriating that aspect of black culture. Okay, let's think about this for a second. Now, as far as I know, dreadlocks are mostly associated with the Rastafari movement from Jamaica. And as far as I know, that's not a racial movement. And beyond that, locks are worn in other places like Africa and the Middle East and Asia for many different reasons, sometimes spiritual or religious reasons. Now, I am not African or Jamaican or Rastafarian or even remotely spiritual or religious at all. Yet no one has ever accused me of cultural appropriation by having dreadlocks. So my question is, why is it okay for me and not everybody else? And that sort of scratches the surface of my whole confusion with the cultural appropriation issue. You see, we live in an increasingly diverse world, and we're at a point where almost everything you participate in borrows aspects from other cultures. Now, I'm not sure if this is one of those things where there's like two different sides, where there's people being a little bit reasonable and then people being a little bit radical, or if just the whole thing is nonsense. Because a lot of people imply that we're not allowed to be fascinated with or inspired by other cultures, which is absurd. Like, a lot of people were mad at Iggy Azalea and Miley Cyrus and Macklemore because they're white, and because they're white, they can't make hip-hop music, and they can't use hip-hop slang. If they sound or look too black, that's cultural appropriation. All right, guys, I'm gonna be too blunt, but that's fucking stupid. First of all, saying something sounds or looks too black is itself racist. Secondly, if you like something or think it's cool or inspired by something from another culture, you shouldn't be criticized for that. You're allowed to like stuff. Using this logic, white people shouldn't be allowed to wear moccasins or eat Chinese food or listen to blues music or watch anime or learn Spanish. Guys, that's fucking stupid. Now, here's what I think happened. Now, there's a genuine concern that we should all have for the downplaying of the history and disadvantages that certain groups face. But some of y'all motherfuckers just took it to a ridiculous level. I mean, maybe you think that Iggy and Miley don't actually give a shit about hip-hop and hip-hop culture, and they're just using it for their own gain. And if that was the case, I think I would have a problem with that, and we could have a discussion about whether that is or is not the case. As of right now, I don't think it is the case, though. I think they just like it, and you're allowed to like stuff. But you do have to take history into account. Take something like blackface, for example. The reason people don't like blackface is not because it's cultural appropriation. The reason people don't like blackface is because blackface has a specific history attached to it. A specific negative, derogatory history attached to it, similar to the N-word. See, that doesn't apply to bindis and moccasins. That doesn't apply to Iggy's black scent. That's racist. Or another example, the American football team called the Washington Redskins. See, this is not a case of white people being inspired by Native American culture or thinking it's cool. This is an example of people using a word that is historically derogatory and saying, like, I don't give a shit about your culture or whatever. And that's not okay. But in a case when a person is just in general interested in or entertained by or inspired by another culture, or even just thinks it's cool, I don't understand why that's a bad thing. You're allowed to like stuff. That's just me, though. Honestly, most of you probably don't even care about this. I've just been spending way too much time on Tumblr. Oh, Tumblr. What should the next video be about? Drop a comment. I want to give a shout out to all of the new subscribers. How you doing? Please press the like button. Subscribe if you like my hair. Holla.
That is a man that goes by the name The One Janitor, and he has millions and millions of followers for his work. So if you felt provoked by some of the things that he was offering, I would be very excited to hear your thoughts. As we wrap up, I will continue to power through and ask you to make sure you capture those thoughts so that we can unpack what he just offered us. he is our introduction to some of the scholarship that has happened in ethnic studies. I'm also an ethnic studies professor and a gender studies professor at the University of Colorado. Excuse me. And what I'd like to do is give you a very quick crash course on some of the updates to theoretical developments that I think reflect very well what has been taught to us by the Urantia Book. The first one being offered by Peggy McIntosh back in 1970. Peggy McIntosh is the person who put forth the concept of white privilege. White privilege has been expanded beyond the binary of black-white politics. Privilege is now something that we refer to how one's gender, race, class, etc. may lead to unearned advantages and require a willingness and structural understanding to recognize racism as a default system that institutionalizes an unequal distribution of resources and power. I'd like to offer you a video that I think defines it very well. But to clarify, privilege does not mean you're rich, a bad person, or have had everything handed to you, or have never had challenges or struggles. Privilege just means that there are some challenges and struggles you won't experience because of who you are. Right? That by virtue of who you are, where you were born, those things won't be encountered by you. And when you're accustomed to privilege, equality can feel like oppression, which is what we see happening within the politics of the United States right now. Many people trying to protect unearned privileges. Here's our video on how to teach young people about the concept of privilege.
Line up, everybody line up. We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I've said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
So our concept of privilege must be expanded beyond just money. It's about what opportunities have been given to us. This photo you're seeing right now is of homeless children in India being taught by volunteers who go under the bypasses of the freeway and create chalkboards on the concrete to instruct them. By virtue of being educated in a classroom, you are privileged. There are many other circumstances in which we have advantages in life. Some of us more than others, and some of us have different types of privileges that were not defined in the video. I know, for example, as a performer, I have an advantage of being ethnically ambiguous to people when I'm performing, and I can get away with all kinds of fusion elements that people may challenge me on otherwise if I were more readable as one ethnicity over another. So that is one of my unearned privileges in life that I have to take responsibility for. We all have them. We also have to remember what our book tells us, that much of what a mortal would call good luck might really be actually bad luck. The smile of fortune that bestows unearned leisure and undeserved wealth may be the greatest of human afflictions. The apparent cruelty of a perverse fate that heaps tribulation upon some suffering mortal may in reality be the tempering fire that is transmuting the soft iron of immature personality into the tempered steel of real character. So, what is our first step in moving forward to focus on healing? Is to see the intrinsic worth of another, but also include ourselves in that assessment. And when stepping into those interactions, we have to first make note of what are the power dynamics at play. What are the uncalled out assumptions we've made about someone else? What are our hidden biases about someone else? Anti-bias work seeks to understand the power differentials in each circumstance or situation. There's an assumption that because I maybe have the title of a university behind my name, that I have more knowledge or expertise than other people. This may or may not be true. I leave it up to my students to make that decision when they evaluate me. Anti-bias work aims to move away from a binary of absolutes or notions of right or wrong. It goes very specifically into the gray areas where some issues of morality may be unclear and hard to define. Anti-bias work acknowledges the hidden bias impacting our perceptions and subconscious stories about the world around us. This is important to note that many of us feel we're not biased, but the truth is these are subconscious things that we have been institutionalized in from birth. For example, there's a wonderful story where, forgive me if you've heard this before, there is a physician, a wonderful surgeon at a hospital, and the surgeon receives a call that there's an emergency surgery coming through the ER room and to please prepare for procedure. And as the surgeon washes up, gets gloves on, and prepares all the instruments, they wheel the patient in, and the surgeon throws their hands up and says, "I cannot operate on this patient because it's my son." What we have to realize is many people assume before that story is presented that the surgeon is likely to be male. How many of you actually assumed a male surgeon in your imagination? Anybody? Actually, I don't have everyone on screen, unfortunately, so I can't test that. And I think I told this story very poorly, but usually most of my undergraduate students assume the surgeon is male, and that is part of the hidden bias we have around gender. We have that hidden bias around everything: classism, gender, sexuality, sexual preference, classism, ethnicity, music, education, all of it. Anti-bias work is something that is being tracked and carefully cultivated by the oldest organization in the United States for it, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they clarify that there is a definite difference between prejudice and racism. They say all of us are prejudiced. We have this bias built into our social coding. And it's part of organizational clusters that we use to understand our world. But racism is different because racism is the unilateral, categorical display of bias against a group. So for example, if I'm in New York City and I hail a cab, and the cab driver comes up, and it might be an Italian gentleman, and I have an unpleasant experience or maybe a terse conversation, maybe I ask him to stop the cab and I get out and I'm a little traumatized by the incident. I remember it next time I hail a cab in New York City. If the driver comes up, I have a choice as I open the door to that cab and I see another Italian gentleman. Am I going to treat all Italians the same way? Or am I going to treat this individual as unique, as different, as a new interaction? If I categorically treat him as I did all other men because of one encounter with another rude Italian, then I am exercising what we think of as racism.
A lot of people don't like my comedy. A lot of white people don't like my comedy. A lot of white people say this to me. Hey, Amit. Hey, you get on stage, you make your jokes about white people. You say white people this, white people that. What if I did something like that, huh? What if I got on stage and I said, yeah, black people are like this, Muslims are like that. You'd probably call me a racist, wouldn't you? And I say, yeah, I would. Yeah, you should never do that. That's bad for your health. They're like, well, you do that, Amit. You do that. You get on stage, make your jokes about white people. Don't you think that's a kind of racism? Don't you think that's dun dun dun? Reverse racism. I said no. I don't think that's reverse racism. Not because I think reverse racism doesn't exist, right? If you ask some black and brown people, they'll tell you flat out there is no such thing as reverse racism. I don't agree with that. I think there is such a thing as reverse racism, and I could be a reverse racist if I wanted to. All I would need would be a time machine, right? And what I do is I get in my time machine, I go back in time to before Europe colonized the world, right? And convince the leaders of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Central and South America to invade and colonize Europe, right? Just occupy them, steal their land and resources, set up some kind of, like, I don't know, trans-Asian slave trade where we exported white people to work on giant rice plantations in China. Just ruin Europe over the course of a couple of centuries, so all their descendants would want to migrate out and live in the places where black and brown people come from. But of course, in that time, I'd make sure I set up systems that privilege black and brown people at every conceivable social, political, and economic opportunity. White people would never have any hope of real self-determination. Is every couple of decades make up some fake war as an excuse to go and bomb them back to the Stone Age and say it's for their own good because their culture's inferior, and just for kicks. subject white people to colored people's standards of beauty, so they end up hating the color of their own skin, eyes, and hair. If, after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of that, I got on stage at a comedy show and said, hey, what's the deal with white people? Why can't they dance? That would be reverse racism.
That was comedian Amer Rahman illustrating systemic privilege and systemic racism, how things are built in over time to continue to privilege certain categories of peoples over others, and how when we are hyper aware of waking up to those things, we don't go back to sleep. We start to understand our own positionality against those systems of privilege and try to maybe advocate for others. The idea behind it is to be able to work on ourselves before we feel that we have the right to work on others, and to understand that positionality very carefully before we feel we have anything to say about someone else's spirituality or morality. Moving on. The last thing I would like to talk about on this point is there is a new term called historical trauma, which really looks at the transgenerational effects of these systems of power. The transgenerational effects of trauma occur via a variety of mechanisms, often without realizing it. Excuse me. My slides just scrambled on me. Here we go. The transgenerational effects of trauma occur via a variety of mechanisms, including the impact of attachment relationships with caregivers, the impact on parenting and family functioning, the association with parental, physical, and mental illness, disconnection and alienation from the extended family, culture, and society. These effects are exacerbated by exposure to continuing high levels of stress and trauma, including multiple bereavements and other losses. The process of vicarious traumatization, where children witness the ongoing effects of the original trauma which a parent or caregiver has experienced. Even when children are protected from the traumatic stories of their ancestors, the effects of past traumas still impact on children in the form of ill health, family dysfunction, community violence, psychological morbidity, and early mortality. So even if the youngsters did not experience the original trauma themselves, we are finding that they are still dying 20, 30, and 40 years earlier than their counterparts in other cultures because of this historical trauma. We have a lot of work to do. So in terms of working on ourselves, the next video is actually pulled again from the theories of ethnic studies, and it's drawn from the binary of American privilege, which has been very strongly European American versus Black American versus Latino American. Depending on where you are on the planet, these power dynamics may be different for you. I was just in Canada, where I understood that most of the power dynamics of disenfranchised populations dealt more with Chinese Canadians versus European Canadians. And I think it differs wherever you are on the planet. So I would like for you to please think about the next video in terms of a general dynamic. And I hope you have your sense of humor with you, because we've got a little more irreverence coming your way.
Hey Jen, I really like your hair.
Thanks, Becky.
I think the curls are awesome. Black hair's the best.
Can you not do that? It's kind of inappropriate.
What? Why?
Well, it's kind of racist.
You're probably wondering what went wrong in this workplace interaction between Becky and Jen. Unless you have a keen understanding of racial discrimination in today's workforce, you probably didn't notice that something very offensive has taken place. Jen called Becky the R word, causing Becky to feel shame and sadness. How can we avoid situations like this? Workplace discrimination is a very serious issue, and we have to be sensitive to our employees' different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And just as it's important to be sensitive to our Black, Arab, and other non-white coworkers, it's also equally important to be sensitive to our white coworkers' sensitivity to that sensitivity.
Can you believe that Trump wants to build the wall? I mean, that must really bother you as a Mexican.
Actually, I am Bolivian.
How dare you? I went to Berkeley.
Sometimes racial discrimination in the workplace can happen unintentionally. Take, for instance, this scene where Marco accidentally angered Tom by correcting him. Marco may not be Mexican, but correcting Tom in that manner made Tom confused, scared, and hostile. This situation could have been avoided altogether. Let's see how.
Can you believe Trump wants to build a wall? I mean, that must really bother you as a Mexican.
Yeah.
I love Mexicans. They're so hardworking.
Yeah, yes, we are great.
Viva Mexico!
Crisis averted. Every day we learn more about how people of color live with histories of oppression. And every day we forget about those who also live with those histories, the oppressors. You see, the average person of color has spent years developing a thick skin when it comes to systemic racial oppression, while the average white person can go through many of their formative years without ever having to think about race. So hearing about racism can be traumatic for your white coworkers and create a negative work environment. White privilege might seem like everything is easier all the time, and it is, but it can also be hard because feelings are hard.
Yes, I just got the raise. $30 an hour. Let's celebrate after work. That's great. $30. Congratulations. Oh my God.
Denise just got a raise and told Jane about it in celebration. But what Denise doesn't know is Jane is actually earning far more for the same job, and now she feels guilty about it. If Denise had just kept her new income to herself, this whole situation could have been avoided.
Yes, I just got the raise. Let's celebrate after work. Drinks are on you.
Of course.
Being sensitive to white fragility is difficult, which is why we've devised a simple system to help you foster a non-hostile work environment for your white employees and coworkers. Stop, ignore, listen, empathize, never complain, and eat. Or as we like to call it, the silence system. Here, let's watch what happens when silence is put into action.
So I'm not racist.
Stop.
Like, I voted for Obama.
Ignore.
Like, I understand the reason for the Black Lives Matter movement.
Listen.
But it's just like, all lives do matter.
Empathize.
I just feel like race really isn't relevant in America anymore.
Never complain.
You're really easy to talk to, Adrian.
And eat. That's right. Excellent. Adrian was able to diffuse a potentially hostile work situation by using silence. Great work, Adrian. America is a beautiful country built on some ugly things. Things that just don't belong in the workplace. And in order to remain productive, we must all pitch in to protect our most powerful and most fragile. Because when silence works, everyone works. So let's all be sensitive. White sensitive. Hey, I'm so glad the two of you made it to the end of this video. It's just us, finally. So.
Okay, hopefully you're still there. So when we're talking about cultural collision moments, and places where people can easily misunderstand each other's values, misunderstand each other's communications, you may be party to an experience like this or a bystander in public to an event like this. What I would like to do is start with strategies for handling these situations. And our first starting place for me is getting beyond bystander paralysis. This is from an organization called Hollaback in Vancouver, the Vancouver chapter, that put together this information of what to do if you see some type of an assault or an insult happening in a public situation. Most bystanders passively accept bullying by watching and doing nothing, often without realizing it. These bystanders are also contributing to the problem because passive bystanders provide the audience that a bully craves. You can stand beside the victim. You can offer to speak to them while the attack is going on. You can do direct intervention that communicates clearly that the harassment is unacceptable. You can delegate the problem to an authority that is trained to assist, but also record and report the incident by not just walking away. You can also call the Southern Poverty Law Center in the United States for their tracking of hate crimes. You can distract in the situation, such as pretending to know the person because it offsets the perceived power privilege that the aggressor is trying to create. You can delay your time in the picture to ensure that the person leaves the interaction feeling safe. You can ask if they need help. You can offer with phone calls, offer to get them water, or just be present to say, I'm not leaving here until I know you're okay. Above all, it's recommended that you stay calm and model respectful behavior when you intervene. Then in terms of evolving your own diplomacy skills for a direct interaction that might involve you, I'd like to offer the following tips. Slow down and listen first. What's important is that you pause the inclination to prove anything to anyone. That sounds very strange, I know. You might say, but wait a minute, then why am I getting involved in the first place? I would like to ask you to think of yourself as a diplomat. The diplomat is the person who enters a room and is willing to set aside any personal need for gratification in order to create common ground. So rather than negating a situation, which is something that we also hear about in the Urantia book extensively, trying to find pathways to commonality. That also involves building your own stamina for difficult conversations and emotional discomfort. So remember that your momentary discomfort may be minimal compared to the ongoing inner torment of someone who is willing to hurt or harm another. So alternately, you also want to know how to activate what fortifies, recharges, sustains, inspires, and rebalances you so that you do not create yourself as a welcome mat. This is an important point from ethnic studies about taking responsibility for your own education. Members of disenfranchised groups are not always able to provide tutorials and orientation sessions while managing their own distress. If they choose to, please note it as an act of generosity. It is not uncommon for members of any group to experience what we call as ambassador fatigue. So please don't take it as a personal affront. Avoid oversimplification by adhering to a single narrative on any issue. Remember, there are exceptions to every story and frequently multiple truths to consider. So for example, I have the words there, a plant in a crowded room. If you were in a room crowded with bodies and many, many people, and I walked into the room and took a little flower pot and sat it right in the middle of the room on the floor and said, okay, everybody describe the plant to me. You would get 50 different descriptions of a plant that may or may not be accurate. They can say, well, it's unseen for me. And other people would say, oh, it's pink and there are small clusters of blossoms. And each person would have a different vantage point. Is anyone being dishonest? No. They're all explaining from their different vantage points what is true for them. And I think it's the same thing when we consider cultural differences, that we have to, at some point, suspend our judgment and trust the people that are closest to the issues that are being presented to give us some type of illustration of their experiences. Zooming in and zooming out, back and forth, to constantly look at the micro and the macro of what we're thinking on an issue rather than only the stance of our own perspective. We have to remember that cultural groups will not have homogeneity in their responses to an issue. because individual temperament and life experiences can lead to a variety of survival strategies against stressors at both a collective and an individual level. What I mean by that is it's frequently important, well, let me give you an example. If you have an abusive parent in a household and maybe 3 children, each of those children might have a different response to the abuse. One child may be very confrontational and may try to run away early. Another child may try to align themselves with the aggressor, trying to get on their good side and just stay out of harm's way as much as possible. Another child may be very internalized with their stress and become very quiet and withdrawn. Each of them has a very different response to the same triggers. And it's the same thing with larger cultural groups. So if we're talking to someone and we make the assumption that they should feel or think a certain way because they belong to a cultural group, we need to rewind, step back, and suspend ourselves so that we don't make those assumptions. More than anything, we need to stay open to feedback to ourselves, even if it is delivered in less than ideal ways, myself included. And believe me, I get it all the time from young college students who want to tell me about their viewpoints. More than anything, ask how you can help or support rather than trying to walk in and try to command a situation. Ask first. There are many allies that come into situations saying, oh, I understand this issue. I've educated myself. I know what needs to happen here, and I know what you think, and I know what your issues are. And the truth is, listening is so much better than trying to tell someone about themselves. Reject all tendencies for name-calling, belittling, stereotyping, and exhibiting bias. Be aware of what are called the costs of racial labor or emotional labor. Individuals bearing the burden of making others comfortable because they are hyper-aware of the stereotypes they must navigate in the spaces they inhabit, like parks, restaurants, airplanes, social arenas, because this is work they don't get paid for and they may be exhausted. I myself am frequently approached with the question, what are you? Sometimes I'm in the mood to have a playful conversation about that, and there are frequently times where I just don't feel like being the exotic novelty of the day in someone's world and explaining my background again and again and again and again. So again, emotional or racial labor. If you try to approach someone in a very allied way, trying to learn more, and they are not receptive, please don't take it personally. They may be having a day of emotional labor fatigue. One of my workshop participants in Massachusetts had a really good point. They said, even when you make the best effort, you will occasionally fail, but ultimately it is actually good for you in a strange way, because you learn so much from an interaction that may have gone wonky or gone in a poor direction, and how you will handle that kind of interaction next time. And it's also true that your modeling and your behavioral choices really have the possibility of sowing seeds of insight within someone else that can bear spiritual fruit later on, far after the time of the encounter. I am fortunate as an educator to have seen that frequently, in that many students write letters sometimes 10, 15 years after I've taught them saying, I get it, I understand now. I'm sorry I was a knucklehead. Thank you for not giving up on me. That's the benefit of being an educator. But as citizens, we don't always have that reconciliation and that resolution that's offered to us with each interaction. But please don't doubt that by modeling positive behavior, some good has been done. Getting unstuck when you're in a situation that you just do not want to co-sign, when someone's behavior is just something you cannot get behind. There's a wonderful book that I would recommend called Crucial Conversations, and it's about how to work on yourself first to check your own perceptions and be willing to apologize for any small percentage of weirdness that you may have contributed. To say, yes, I definitely had an edge to my voice and I apologize. That's something that I would like to do better on next time. You know, maybe it's 5% of what went wrong, but to be able to be responsible for that 5% means that you are modeling good behavior. Because with diplomats, whenever someone walks into a room trying to change what's happening, there are, in diplomacy studies, what are called healthy motives and unhealthy motives. So if you look at the right-hand side of your screen first, rather than your left, the right-hand column, you'll see that positive motives are about learning, finding the truth, producing results, solving problems, strengthening relationships, building common ground, and bridging the gap for coexistence. If we look at the converse motives on the left-hand side of your screen, people who want to get entrenched and are trying to be proven right frequently are defensive. They're trying to save face. They're interested in punishing, blaming, insulting, and devaluing. They avoid conflict just to try and keep peace, or they ostracize and isolate others. And so before we go into a difficult conversation or an interaction that has the potential to be painful, we want to look at where we are within these motivations. And if we feel that we can't be productive, to maybe reschedule a conversation or to really strongly put ourselves in check so that we will do no harm as we move forward with our actions. Because we want to remember that we have the power to make someone's life miserable or joyous. You can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. You can humiliate, humor, hurt, or heal. And in all cases, you are responsible for deciding whether a situation will be escalated or de-escalated, or another person humanized or dehumanized. That's from educational theorist Chaim Ginot. Our own Urantia Book tells us that when a moral chooses to be unselfish when confronted by the urge to be selfish, it is primitive religious experience. No animal can make such a choice. Such a decision is both human and religious. It embraces the fact of God consciousness, the basis of brotherhood of man. When mind chooses a right moral judgment by an act of free will, such a decision constitutes a religious experience. The next photo that's going to pop up on your screen might be slightly jarring, but I do want to share it with you. This is a photo of an emergency room where African-American nurses are trying to save a life of a KKK member from the 1920s. These are people that chose to do the right thing above and beyond their political leanings, above and beyond their cultural loyalties, trying to do the right thing. So Robin DiAngelo is the person who coined the phrase white fragility. And working on ourselves in any interaction means being able to look beyond, again, the binary of white and black, to really look at where we may feel fragile and how we want to proceed with that fragility. Robin DiAngelo has a very humorous approach to it. This is what she had to say. There are rules of engagement. If you find yourself thinking any of these, chances are you're using your fragility as a weapon against someone else in an interaction. She says, do not give me feedback on my racism under any circumstances. If you do, you break the cardinal rule that the proper tone is crucial. Feedback must be given calmly. If there is any emotion in the feedback, then the feedback is invalid and will not be considered. There must be trust between us. You must trust that I am in no way racist before you can give me feedback on my racism. Our relationship must be issue-free. If there are issues between us, you cannot give me feedback on racism. The feedback must be given immediately, otherwise it will be discounted because it was not given sooner. The feedback must be given privately, regardless of whether the incident occurred in front of other people. To give feedback in front of anyone else, even those involved in a situation, is to commit a serious social transgression, and thus the feedback is invalid. You must be as indirect as possible. To be direct is to be insensitive and will invalidate the feedback and require repair. As a white person, I must feel completely safe during any discussion of race. Giving me feedback on my racism will cause me to feel unsafe, so you will need to rebuild my trust by never giving me feedback again. Point of clarification, when I say safe, what I really mean is comfortable. Giving me feedback on any privilege invalidates the form of oppression that I experience, classism, sexism, heterosexism. We will then need to focus on how you oppressed me. You must focus on my intentions, which cancel out the impact of my behavior. And to suggest my behavior had a racist impact is to misunderstand me. So you will need to allow me time to explain until you can acknowledge that you have a misunderstanding. Do these sound familiar in any way? They've certainly crossed my mind at times when I'm defensive with young students who I think want to tell me about something they're uncomfortable about. And I think, who are they? Who do they think they're talking to? I'm their professor. I'm in power here. And then I have to check myself and say, wait a minute, I'm being fragile. Because what Robin DiAngelo suggests is how, when, and where you actually get feedback is irrelevant, because it's the feedback that you need. And understanding that it might be hard for someone to give, take it any way you can get it. Actually get hungry for feedback. And from a position of social, cultural, and institutional power and privilege, believe it or not, you're probably safe and you can probably handle it. And if you cannot, it's actually on you to build your stamina, right? That's something that's interesting, because in the Urantia book, we're told, yes, turn the other cheek. Yes, forgive over and over and over. And we have a hard time situating that in our understanding of what it means in a one-on-one interaction when we feel attacked. But the truth is, we are probably, the weather inside our minds is probably much calmer and will be restored to calm much more quickly than the person who is the aggressor. We have to remember that that alone is privilege, and it can be wielded with care. Robin DiAngelo says, the first thing you should do is just simply say, thank you. That's a tough one. As the recipient of someone who's coming to you with a conversation, here are some possibilities in language. I thank you for approaching me. The information you are presenting is unsettling and difficult for me, but I want you to know that I'm interested in understanding what you're offering. And I pledge to take a break when I feel the urge to be hurtful in this conversation, so please be patient with me if I need to momentarily step back. I want to hear you fully and be thoughtful in my responses. Would you be willing to meet with me again after I've had a chance to consider this and work on myself? I hear you, and I wish to sincerely consider this feedback. May I ask you a few questions to help me situate this information better in my understanding? So in other words, not to be the person that shuts down, even if you are being subjected to aggression, but to be the person that can keep the room in motion. You can also keep returning to common goals, shared meaning, and observable facts. You can try some diffusing language, which is from nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg, also something that was referred to us by Jeff Waddles just a few weeks ago. Here are some potential statements you can use. I know we see things differently, but I really want to hear what your thoughts are about this. Would you be willing to educate me on your perspectives and experiences? And this is the next one we use all the time in my classroom. I'm going to fumble with what I want to say, but could you please bear with me while I ask you a question? I'm keen to learn more about this. With our young people, we frequently tell them, you don't have to know all the answers before you raise your hand. Ask your question, even if you're not sure if it might be potentially offensive. And so they start with, I'm going to fumble with my words. And the entire class responds in one mass chorus, fumble forward. And that's when we know we're going to suspend our judgments for the next few moments while this person struggles with trying to formulate a question. And people actually do something beautiful. They start offering other words. They start finishing each other's sentences and saying, is this what you mean? I was wondering about that too. And that momentum leads to such incredible insights. And again, no hurt feelings. The next statement, I wish to speak with you about a difficult topic, but I'm hoping to get past that discomfort and work towards mutual listening and understanding with you. Or if you feel you need something a little more direct and strong, I am not comfortable with what is happening here, and talking to you about it is very important to me. That's an intervention technique of being able to interrupt when you see something that you just don't feel you can live with. And of course, the Urantia book gives us modeling for how to intervene. Jesus did some beautiful coaching on this very point. So if you look at page 1762, you can read the details here. Yes, I'll give you a chance to screenshot this and grab it so that you can go read up on Jesus' own suggestion for intervening with someone who has transgressed against you. And hopefully you've all had a chance to screenshot that. If not, I will definitely post that link. But it's called calling in instead of calling out. Robin DiAngelo pointed out in her own scholarship that many people make a performance of calling out someone who has hurt them. A big press release, a big announcement, trying to make a deal of it. Those are effective strategies, but is it possible that we could call in first with the individual and try and heal between two people before we create a performance of calling out? It's worth a try. We do know that there are individuals that will shut down. And this is what the book has to say to us about them. When men shut off the appeal to the spirit that dwells within them, there is little that can be done to modify their attitude. Our response to that, potentially anger, but what our Urantia book also tells us is that anger is a material manifestation which represents, in a general way, the measure of the failure of the spiritual nature to gain control of the combined intellectual and physical natures. Anger indicates your lack of tolerant brotherly love plus your lack of self-respect and self-control. Anger depletes health, debases the mind, and handicaps the spiritual teacher of man's soul. So if we can notice our anger and then refocus on perhaps the one in front of us who might be more wounded than aggressive, it gives us another starting place, a neutralizing palette to start from. But we must remember that if we sense someone might be a danger to us or themselves, it is time to reach out and ask for help. That's the bottom line, is that there isn't a rose-colored lens to put on a situation when someone is harmful to themselves or others. And it means that we rely on ourselves as a community to get help and to try to create a safety net so that someone will not create additional harm. Our book also tells us that loving is really our top goal, that love is more than catching hate, that genuine and unselfish love is actually contagious. Each mortal could only become a focus of dynamic affection, and this benign virus of love would soon pervade to all sentimental emotion streams of humanity to such an extent that all civilization would be encompassed by love, and that would be the realization of the brotherhood of humans. We have the benefit of age, some of us, and in that, we know that tapering our own immaturities over time has the benefit of making us better healers, so that we acquire grace in the ability to stay present during difficult conversations, to suspend judgment, and to be able to keep our ears and our hearts open, even when someone is insulting us, to see them with love, to see them in all of their difficulty, anger, strife, and confusion, trying to make a way for themselves and trying not to return the harm. Because the higher a creature's education, the more respect he has for the knowledge, experience, and opinions of others. I want to offer these words from Mother Teresa. She said, "People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you've got. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. Looking at another tradition that is supposedly in contrast to Christianity, we're going to look at Wicca, that offers the following words. A witch can only function properly as a healer and a protector when she truly understands how fragile humans are. A witch must always seek to understand rather than be understood. To walk the path of the wise is to sacrifice every sense of entitlement. Two contradictory traditions in religion, but still giving us the same communication about the worth of another and our role as brothers to them. Because transformation isn't sweet or bright, right? I'll let you read that quote on your own. It's not an easy process, but is it a worthy process? Absolutely. I call it approaching life with an open heart and thick skin, knowing that we can survive whatever comes at us. And I'm encouraged by these words from the Urantia Book. Long before reaching Havana, the ascendant children of time have learned to feast upon uncertainty, to fatten upon disappointment, to enthuse over apparent defeat, to invigorate in the presence of difficulties, to exhibit indomitable courage in the face of immensity, and to exercise unconquerable faith when confronted with the challenge of the inexplicable. Long since the battle cry of these pilgrims became, in liaison with God, absolutely nothing is impossible. So every time you feel you're at that edge, remember that that leap takes you to a potentially new understanding. And I really want to thank all of you for taking that leap with me today with what may have been some very provocative material. What I would like to do is open the forum for discussion. And since I've done way too much talking, I'm going to let conversation flow with as little input from me as possible. For further resources on where all of this material is taken from, the link that you see on your screen right now goes to my website, where I have put a resource page with all kinds of articles and titles and downloads for your curiosity and pleasure and further learning. So please do help yourself. And the forum is now open. Thank you, friends. Is that a hand up? Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Donna. I really loved your presentation. I've seen those videos like 1,000 times. I actually share them a lot. And I'm always laughing at the one, the silence, because me and Papa, we laugh about that. I was like, we started to practice the silence. So, very, very nice. I wanted to give you this one as well, too, because those were some really beautiful quotes. And I'm always using this one a lot when I'm talking to people. I'm going to just drop it here into the chat.
Yes, thank you.
This is from paper 52 on the post-bestowal age and some of the things that about moving towards into light in life. And because I come from a very mixed background as well too, and I get the same questions about the exoticness of you know, where you come from and your background and stuff. And growing up in the military, that was, and traveling I always thought this was a very important aspect, intellectual cross-fertilization. And because, when you're traveling in the military and you're living in different places, you have to learn about other cultures.
You have to
Understand the different races, the different things. And I noticed in America that that's almost like we're aware of American culture, but there's so much diversity within America as well too, because of all the different people that come from all over the world, all the different immigrants and their backgrounds. And I would encourage people to get, a little bit more racial diversity within their own lives, of learning, making new friends outside of your own race. Learning about the different things instead of just always learning about what we're always, but it's also taking a step outside of your own culture as well too, to learn about other cultures and stuff.
I would like to give a shout out to your comment, but also to Rick and Susan Lyons on that very issue. Rick and Susan Lyons went out of their way to reach out to me. And Susan even wrote me an extraordinary letter when she knew these issues were on my radar, taking personal responsibility for her own knowledge and asking, what can I do? It brought me to tears. And I just want to say thank you for that generosity of spirit and for modeling so well.
Donna, thank you. And I will say that you were easy to love right off the bat, but I have not always done well, and I regret that I haven't always done well being sensitive. I've tried to be sensitive, but I know I've made mistakes in the past. And I think, Antoinette, I love you dearly, hon, but I know that we've tried to have conversations in the past, and it hasn't been well, so I need to learn, and that's why I'm here today, so that I can do better with making people feel comfortable with me. I blurt things out, and I apologize for that, but
no, girl,
I do love you dearly.
I love you. That was when I saw the email that you sent me. I was like, wow, are they seriously going to do this? Because this is so needed right now. And I've been saying this for a long time, that, with the teachings of the Urantia Book, we have to start having these conversations, and we do have to start having these dialogues, and people don't have to be offended, because it is a touchy thing and people don't want to discuss, but it's like, if we don't discuss, we're never going to sit there and move to the next level by having these open and honest conversations, knowing that we are trying to come from a place of love, and also not saying this is not a blame game because we're talking about racial inequalities or different things like that. It's not about laying blame. It's about, like, let's have these discussions so that way we can actually move forward into the future and stuff. But I never ever felt any kind of way, Susan, not once ever. And I love you, and thank you so much for sending me this study today and everything, because I think it's very well put together. Thank you, Donna. Wonderful. We should have more like these, especially in the UB community, because these are the things that are going to be changing the world for the better in the future, by actually taking the practical applications of the teachings and then putting it out there in our own lives and, in the world and stuff. So bravo.
Yay. Thank you for that. And thank you for posting the article that you just did. I'm familiar with that article. It's a good one. So thank you so, so, so much. And I promised I wouldn't talk. I just got to say, I myself have misstepped so many times. As a person of color, I have also weaponized my ethnicity against white friends at times. So it really is about all of us learning about our positionality and taking responsibility. This, to me, it goes far, far, far beyond just a white-black issue, a white-brown issue. It has been historically dominated as a white-brown issue, but it can also be a male-female issue. It can be a have-have-nots issue. Inequity anywhere is what we're trying to address. We're just taking the scholarship from the field of ethnic studies, and I'm hoping that you can take the concepts that were offered today and use them more broadly anytime you see inequity in your environment. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. In my home country, I'm from Canada, perspective are a bit different because of our cultural difference. Even in French Canada, it's very different than the rest of English Canada. But when you did talk about education, that's I think that's a very sensitive area where much can be done. If I compare my own upbringing to some people that I know or met around here and there, my parents were never talking negatively of other races. Well, in fact, there were not that many black people in our area. Only when we went to a big city would we see them. But I remember at that time there was a lot of saying about the difference between the black, like they were saying black were black for, stupid reason, they would say. And I would, even at my young age, my parents were not agreeing with those by not amplifying those things. But I remember thinking about those remarks that people would say about black people and being very touched, negatively touched in some way, but, reflecting on them. And I've noticed in my life, even before I came to the Urantia Book, how much the attitude of my parents toward other races had a big influence on my onlooking. And I was one to always look to become a friend to people with differences. And I remember my first real touch with the black person was when I was 17 years old, or 18 mostly. I was in the Navy then, and there was this black guy in our mess, sharing the same area where we slept. And I wanted to know more about him. So one day, I was always curious about black people's hair. And I touched his head, just to feel his hair. And he got offended by it. So when I saw that picture, and I didn't want to offend him in any way. I just wanted to, to learn more about it, but maybe it was my way of doing things that really offended it. But I didn't move away from that. I even traveled to Africa to get to know black people more, and read many, many books about the history of Africa. But I'm also curious about other races. I wanted to make friends with Chinese people, but they were not available in my area. So. But I understand what you're saying about this, and even us, Urantia Book reader, we need to embrace everything that you said. If we're not living the change that you propose, then who are we? We're just perpetuating hate relationship, differences, emphasizing differences. But spiritually, there's none. And just to close my comments, many years ago, we've had, I'm still friend with a black teacher from Africa, and someone wrote to us, and because he was teaching spirituality, and asked, how can a black person teach those things, when we said, that they might be inferior. And I was offended by his comments, and I read the comments to my black friend, and he asked me to answer that comments. And so I took quotes from the Urantia Book to support what I would say to him. Spirituality, in fact, spiritually, we're all equal. We might have difference in expression throughout our home race. I understood that going to Africa. And I don't see, there are differences in expression of how we are, but I found very, very intelligent people in Africa. They had difference in how they perceive the world, and I found that very interesting. So I think, like you said, understanding others give us a possibility of enlightening our mind and loving them more and finding qualities. And I found many, many qualities in black people from Africa that made me love them even more. So I think ignorance breeds suspicion and hate. So we need to do more about educating young people at home. So thank you anyway for doing what you did. Very nice.
Thank you so much. And again, I hope the irreverence did not ruffle too many feathers. I tend to deal with a lot of young college people that are attracted to a lot of social media, and I find speaking to them on terms they can understand helps quite a bit. But if anything did offend you today, please don't be afraid to let me know, to write to me. Your critique is absolutely welcomed.
Nothing offended at all. Nothing.
Okay.
I'm very open on those questions. I want to learn. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I see there's a lot of activity in the chat window. I was asked to post the resource link. I've done that. And there are some nice exchanges happening. I just want to thank everyone for such lively participation in the chat window. We have about, 13 minutes left. And so I wanted to make sure I give Jeannie an opportunity to make any announcements. And it looks like, Antoinette, you have your hand up again, please.
Well, since we're making announcements and since Gaten had mentioned Africa, so I'm also offering and extending an invitation for the UB Africa conference that we're doing in April. And this is really fantastic because I've invited Marcia from Brazil to be one of the presenters because I'm inviting international female speakers. And then also we have male students that are coming from different parts of Africa, from Cameroon, from La Côte d'Ivoire, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Ethiopia, some women there. So this is really would be a great international exchange if any Urantia readers from anywhere in the world to sit there and be able to cross exchange with a lot of the African readers from across the continent. I think it'll be our largest conference in Africa yet. You know, it's just growing and growing. So please, you know, let people know. And if anybody is interested, just let me know as well, too. We've been having beautiful growing of Urantia Book readers in Africa, and mixing with the Europeans and Americans and Canadians will be wonderful as well, too.
Thank you for that.
Oh, the date will be April 20th through the 23rd. So it's a wonderful 3 days. Mm-hmm.
Do you have an online link, Antoinette?
Yes, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat room. Thank you. But you guys are amazing. I really love that. And I'm glad that nobody was offended because a lot of the things that Donna talks about, I try to say and I get really carried away sometimes and I piss people off and I offend people. So I've been trying to work on my presentations as well too, you know. So, very nice then.
Thank you so much. Jeannie, do you have any announcements that need to be shared before we move towards a wrap-up?
Just this is the last meeting for this year. So if any one of you want to receive our future communications about events and workshops or webinars or the invitation to the conference in Africa, anything you want, you can leave in the chat your email and we will send you the invitations to anything will happen next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And, oh, yes. Pio, I think, has his hand up. Please, Pio.
First, I thought Jeffrey Waddles raised his hand. And then Jeff.
Oh, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Oh, Jeff, you are silenced. Can you give us your mic?
While we're waiting for Jeff, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this, Donna.
Oh, Pio, thank you.
And just for information, I got rid of my dreadlock to be rid of all the conversations.
Yes, I'm so accustomed.
You are on mute, Jeff. You can speak if you want, please.
Okay, there's so much that I would love to say, and I want to be so brief. So I'm already tied myself into a knot, which makes good communication impossible. So help me unravel my knot here. as I begin to speak to you. I love so much of what I've heard. I struggle to have the courage and poise and motivation for difficult conversations. I'm working on that presently in my life right now, making a little bit of progress, and more is needed for me. And this was a beneficial session for me. A number of the values that Donna was expressing, I've devoted a lot of my life to as well. At the same time, I have a couple of qualifying remarks where this foray into being a peacemaker is leading me, took me earlier this week to active shooter training at a church in Cleveland. And so I would just like to say that if you notice someone who looks dangerous, reaching out is a word that would apply in many situations, but not all. And nor do I think that it's always wrong to try to gain strength and self-protection against enemies, potential and actual. I think we have them. Sometimes we don't have enough strength. So myth number one seems to me to have some counterexamples that are worth remembering. I'm interested in this comment about right and wrong as binary opposites. They are opposites when insight has become radically clear. Insight is defined in the Urantia Book as unchallengeable consciousness of cosmic reality. The truth in what Donna was saying is that oftentimes we apply cultural black and white in very complex matters. And as we study the Urantia Book, we see that the complexity of the laws of God are so mind-boggling that we don't expect to understand any of them in this life, except insofar as Jesus and others have put them into simpler expressions. And I think the last thing I will say about this topic is that I wish to offer a qualification to the idea of whenever you see anything offbeat, intervene in some way, and that is that Jesus was not anxiously bothered by the evil around him. He didn't take on everything. He had a mission, he had a path. Now, our path is, okay, the brotherhood of man. So we want to be allies for the brotherhood of man in all kinds of ways. But it was commonly said in the 1960s, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. But you can be indirectly part of the solution by the way you live your life and teach what is yours to teach, and so on and so on. So I wish to just moderate a bit the sense of responsibility for ourselves to engage in every unfortunate situation that we see around us. And last, I think I'll end with this thought. I've been trying to have one of these conversations with a dearly beloved neighbor of mine for a long time, and I just, before this session went, we have appointment for tomorrow afternoon. Prayers for my beloved brother, and I just give thanks for Donna and everyone who showed up and everyone who has participated and explicitly or silently just been here. I think it's fabulous this has happened, and I want to close noting that I worship God as the one who is the promise our eventual triumph over all these immaturities of individual character and civilization. It will come clean, and we have the privilege of being part of it, and we have the privilege of knowing Donna and her resources better. So I just give thanks and worship the God who is the promise of our eventual triumph in all these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Ruth, you can speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hi, Ruth.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much. This is I'm not fully aware of this particular study group structure and what all came into happening or to making this presentation happen. But anyone who is involved, thank you, and thank you for those who let me know. I really, really appreciated so much of this. Jeff, I really appreciate your mentioning or qualifying rather the topic of responding to those situations around us. That's something that I'm still grappling with myself because, well, I'll keep it brief, but just thank you for mentioning that. I really appreciate it. And I don't know. I just wanted to say how grateful I am that this conversation is happening. And without a clear agenda, I would love to plant a seed for any of you who are watching, and whether you're looking for further discussion or maybe a clearer project. I'm just beginning my career in the community college. I'm adjunct faculty right now, and very, very passionate and very eager to learn how I can be a better, well, not better, but just be of service in education, and particularly in the community college model that I'm now in. So if anyone has any ideas or wants to talk with me or has experience, I know some of you on here are now or have been teachers in the past, and anyway, please just remember me and find me in the chat or contact me. And anyway, that's all. I'm just very grateful for this space. Thank you.
So delightful to hear your comments. Thank you so, so, so much. And if there's space to comment, I really love what Jeff had to say. I would like to tag on the agreement, my accord with what he had to say about those qualifying statements, and that, yes, there are many situations where I do not feel the need to jump in, but when I do see some type of injustice, and I'm aware that I am there, present, witnessing for a reason, I want to know how I can be instructive and useful to shifting reality towards a healing possibility. So please don't feel that I'm saying, go march and wave your flags. I'm saying, please, here are some tools if you feel that you're there for a reason. And when you feel that stirring inside of you to make a difference, but not knowing where to start, hopefully you have now a toolkit to jump in. Yes, sir.
If I can add one last comment, I love so much your presentation that all through your presentation I was writing down notes. It's so intensive and material that it's a good thing that's being recorded. I think we'll need to review, revisit your presentation to get most out of it. And I'm trying to find proactive way of eliminating prejudice and racialism in people. I still harbor some prejudice sometimes towards some different denomination, and I'm trying to work through them. So I'm very much in favor of learning more proactive means of getting rid of all those prejudices or differences or bias that we might have. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. I would go on to the resource guide. There's some incredible literature on that guide. that is, you can take at your own pace, but some of it rattles and some of it is heart opening. All of it helps you bump up against thoughts and words and concepts that may be different from your own. And to me, that's always useful. I've learned more that way than I have necessarily putting myself in an echo chamber of my own ideas. Really trying to bump up against difference has made a difference for me. So thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Rick and Susan. Thank you to the entire international community for being a part of this today. I am so honored to have had the opportunity to speak with you. I feel it was potentially even premature as I'm such a new reader. And so I'm going to call this draft number 1 of this presentation in hopes that with your feedback and your questions, it will continue to evolve and be useful to future generations of readers. Thank you, and wishing you a beautiful holiday.
Thank you, Donna. I have learned
Thank you, Donna.
so much from your presentation. I mean, so grateful for your participation because you have, how can I say, very integrated vision about reality in this world. This is something that we need to know. You are working in these items and we need to understand and to have courage to deal with these very important matters. We have 2 ways in our progress in this world. One is human and the other is divine. And when we combine both, we are strong. We have love to all our fellows. We are all brothers and sisters. So thank you very much. Your presentation was excellent. I enjoyed very much listening and seeing your material. So I hope you can count on your participation next year in any subject you want to present, because you are a positive and a very beautiful person. I am so grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, Susan, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to ask if Jeannie, if you approve, that we would, I mean, we just started this conversation. Could we take this to Facebook where you announce this session and carry on our conversation from there? And everyone continue the discussion. And I know many haven't even had a chance to make a comment. So I would love to continue this on Facebook if we could.
Yes, excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Susan, do you want to speak? Okay, sorry. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. God bless you.
Love you guys. I just
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Merry
New Year.
Thank you, brothers and sisters that Pato did.
Yes.
Enjoy the music. Love you guys. Love you, Susan. Girl, call me.
Thank you very much. Thank
Bye,
you,
Rick.
Donna.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.